Did you start off being a hardcore believer in crypto? How did you get into it?
2016, I had an exit in China. They said, look, we can pay you in Bitcoin and Ethereum.
Dr. Najam Kidwai is a serial entrepreneur, an early investor in Robinhood and Coinbase.
He built the world's first crypto SPAC, raising $230 million and took 3 companies public.
Bitcoin sort of early 2000s, it was used by drug dealers and terrorists.
And you had no idea what it was before that?
I was aware of it. Did I really explore it? Did I read the white paper or anything like that? No.
When I invested in Bitcoin, I bought at the top and then I sold low.
Right, okay.
When I sold low, I realized that it's a game of graphs and emotions. Was there a point where you invested in a crypto or a crypto company and you felt interesting? For me is that Bitcoin reserve. And I think if there's a Bitcoin reserve, it means that thing is definitely going to be implemented everywhere else, right?
This is a well thought out game. It's chess, right? But they're playing several moves ahead. Structural change doesn't get done overnight, but it takes years to put into play. And that's exactly what's been happening in and around digital assets. Who do you think invented Bitcoin?
I really like the idea of democratizing startups, but something that really sticks to me is a while ago I was actually at a conference and 2 investors were next to me.
Right.
This was a couple of years back. Both of them were super smart. One of them was saying crypto is a scam,
Right.
and the other one's like crypto is amazing, get into crypto, and very pro crypto. Were you always on the fence about how did your journey get into crypto? Like, how did you get into crypto, and what is your thought about this? Like, I want to understand. Did you start off being a hardcore believer in crypto? How did you get into it?
It's a great question, and there's sort of a light version and a heavy version. So maybe I'll just go with the light one for now. I think, like everyone else, right? Everybody had heard about Bitcoin sort of early 2000s, and it was used by drug dealers and terrorists and all of that, right? And
We heard the same things.
yeah,
here.
yeah. So, it was one of those things that unless you were quite nerdy and unless you were sort of, a hardcore developer, you probably hadn't come across, right? Mainstream definitely hadn't come across. So from my point of view, yes, I was aware of it, but did I really explore it? Did I read the white paper or anything like that? No, at that point. In 2016, I had an exit in China, and I was fortunate enough that they couldn't pay me in anything apart from RMB, which I didn't want. So yeah, so and it was a fair amount of money, and but they said, look, we can pay you in Bitcoin and Ethereum.
And you had no idea what it was before that.
And really, so I called a few of my friends in the Valley and I said, what is this Bitcoin thing? And they said, listen, this could fundamentally change the financial system and rewire everything that we know, or it may not.
Right.
So it's an option, right? So it's a bit like, roulette number 19, right? And, nudge, it may work out, it may not work out, right? And it was several $1 million worth. So I thought, you know what?
Under the circumstances also, right? Because you said, you didn't really have that many options.
You didn't have that many options. I could have bought a nice penthouse in Beijing or whatever, but the reality was that I took it. And, I called my friends in the US and basically said, how do I hold this? How do I buy this? They said, oh, you got to get a wallet online. And I think at that point I had something called a My Ether wallet, a BitPie wallet, very, very early days. A lot of hacks were happening then.
Mm.
And then, I read the Satoshi paper and it was just like, actually, if you think about financial services, I'll tell you a very personal story of like why why should somebody decide the outcome for you? So, I remember as a young kid going to Barclays Bank with my dad. My dad was a market trader.
Cool.
And, we didn't have much money and my father needed a £3,000 loan, right? So this would have been probably early 80s. And, so he dresses up, puts on his jacket and his tie and he's going to the bank. And my father never defaulted on a loan in his life, right? And now when I think about £3,000, it's like, it's a relatively modest sum, right? But in those days, it was a meaningful amount of money to my dad. And I remember the bank manager just being so patronizing to my dad and didn't give him the loan.
What do you think? Why do you think?
No, because it's just like, the usual bullshit, right? Like, what is your security and, what can you put down? And, you don't have the cash flows to support it and all of that rubbish. And And that really, from a very young age, just said to me, you know what? The small guy also has to win.
The small guy also has to win.
Right. And this can't be just for, alhamdulillah, today we have all the resources and all the money that we could ever want. But,
You're flying first class everywhere in the world. So,
so can't complain. But in those days, money was tight and money was hard. And it taught me a lesson, which was there are a lot of hardworking people around the world that will never get the upside and the opportunity to invest in what the wealthy get access to. And I wanted to invest in companies and platforms and founders that wanted to do good in the world, wanted to give back, but also wanted to provide wealth creation. A lot of times, in Asia, in Africa, in the Middle East, people don't even have bank accounts, right? Particularly even in the UAE, a lot of these immigrants who are sending money home, who work incredibly hard for their $1,000 a month to feed their families and support their families back home. So the idea was, how can we invest in things that allow you to move money around more efficiently, allow people to get access to the upside, of an investor that's investing in SpaceX or OpenAI or Stripe? Well, why can't somebody do that with a 100 dirham check?
So I'm interested to know, what was that turning point for you? You said, so at that point, you were supposed to get some money, and then they told you in Beijing, take Ether or Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So, but didn't you think, like, how did you convince yourself that this is not a scam? Because I'm looking at that turning point. Like, was it there where you said, and then you read the white paper and you got
No,
really into it?
I think, look, it came from a recognized venture capital firm, right, in China, right, that were one of, in fact, the earliest VC firm in China. So there was trust on that side of the house. But there was also, like, I remember in 1994, 95, when I was doing CompuServe and bulletin boards on the internet. You might not remember this, but before the sort of dot-com boom came around, sort of 97 to 2000. And I remember, we were looking at these technologies, and my mom would ask, "What are you doing?"
Yeah.
It's like, you graduate, and I'm doing this thing called internet, right? And so exactly like Bitcoin, this sounds dodgy. This isn't going to be real. Stop wasting your time, son. Go and get a proper job, right?
Right.
In an investment bank or a management consultancy or whatever. And really, we're sort of 1998 where we are with crypto adoption today, right? So we're still very, very early. And I remember, in the late 90s, before Amazon really became big, and Priceline and eBay and all of these companies, nobody really understood it. Everybody would say, "Oh, this internet thing is a fad. It's never going to last." And now, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, this is utility. You can't live without this, right?
I have my kids the other day, and I was trying to give them an example. My girls,
Right.
I said, "Why don't you go out and play? Imagine there was no internet." And they couldn't even imagine it. They were like, "What do you mean no internet, Baba?" Like, they couldn't even imagine a life without internet.
And so now imagine, maybe not 20 years on, but maybe a decade on. I mean, I can't remember the last time I went to an ATM. Anyway, globally, I don't think I've been to an ATM in 10 years, right? So
I pay the salaries. I mean, I have a gardener, and so I do the ATM run once a month just for that stuff. Everything else is tap, right?
Yeah, thank God my wife's taking care of that. But the reality is, it is tap, right? And now imagine in the future, we'll be walking credit cards, right? Today, the movement of money has become challenging, right? We have a great business actually born in Dubai called transfi.com, which is fiat on-ramp and off-ramp, right? The ability to move money around using stablecoin, which for immigrants, right? Every dirham, every rupee, every currency counts, right? Fraction of a currency. But now imagine that you can move your money around using USDT, USDC, immediate, no charge of like 25 dirhams to send money back home. So innovation, technology, and adoption of crypto and the replacement of fiat is going to become mainstream.
I started my journey into crypto, and I would imagine that maybe 80% of the people watching this podcast would know, or maybe have felt the same way that so I talk about my experience. I invested in Bitcoin.
Right.
And then I saw it. Well, actually, I heard about Bitcoin from my friend. So I saw it go up and up and up. And when I thought, wow, I'm actually going to miss this, I invested. And the minute I missed it, I waited and I missed. I bought at the top and then I sold low.
Right. Okay.
And when I sold low, I realized that these are my emotions in the game. And it's a game of graphs and emotions. It's not all logic. You need to, like,
Yeah.
even the top institutions in the world get caught up in the game of, emotions, because even institutions are run by humans. So, was there a point where you invested in a crypto or a crypto company and you felt, what did I do? Like, did you freeze? How did you, with all of your experience, how did you manage that?
So it's look, there was an ICO boom, right? Sort of 2017, 2018. I remember when Bitcoin hit 20 grand in Dubai, everybody was going crazy. And then when it fell, it went to like 4K, right? So
Mm,
if you'd bought at that peak and then saw a 90% drop in your portfolio,
that's like a,
that would give you palpitations. I think one of the things that, investing, there is some science to it and there is a bit of an art to it. And it's a bit like gold, right? You never look at it every day. You never look at the price every day, right? It's there. It's just an asset. It's a store of value. And I think with crypto, a lot of these projects were pump and dump, right? So it was like oversold, right? And that is probably lack of understanding of what you're investing in. So I think one of the things that I've had the good fortune is figuring out very quickly, is there any utility to this? So, Fartcoin, right? I mean, it had $1 billion market cap. I mean, right? So there's obviously all these memes that came along. There's like, I don't know how many coins there are now. There's probably hundreds and thousands.
right.
There's probably a dozen that matter, if that, right?
So you're looking at utility.
I'm just looking at like, what is this project about, right? Does it actually achieve anything?
So there's this thing that's still going on now for meme coins.
Right.
And they say if a community can get behind the coin and agree on something, me and you agree that this building has a funny joke, and we decide that that funny joke, we call it, I don't know,
Yeah.
Dogecoin.
Right.
And everyone in this building talks about Dogecoin. And you have to agree that there's some value in that meme coin called Dogecoin. Well, as long as we're all talking about it, right? But is that real utility, you'd say?
I think it's also a question of easy money, right? You want to make easy money, go to the casino, right? That's one extreme, right?
Yeah.
From my perspective, I think ultimately, if you're launching a project or you're launching a token, does it actually achieve something? And for people that are seeking that sort of 100x, right? So there was a time, 2016, 17, you just had to show up. You didn't have to do anything else and you could get 100x.
Just put
Right?
your money in.
Just put your money in and, khalas, right? You're done. Today, that's not possible.
No?
Right? So, what is going to give you 100x or 1000x has become much more challenging, right? So even when you look at the Trump coin, right, the Melania coin, the Barron coin, and then there were so many scams on those coins. People didn't know what was what was real, what was not real.
Exactly.
And I think one of the safeguards for the public should be regulation, right? Because in financial services, and particularly when you're taking people's money, they need to have the confidence that it's legit, that it's real. And, you're always going to have people in society that are going to look for quick money. You're always going to have people that will oversell and overpromise. And unfortunately, those people are left holding the bag. So just like you said in your instance, when you bought at the peak and you sold at the bottom, if you'd had conviction to hold.
No, at the time, right now, looking back, you can see like how long has Bitcoin been there? 15 years
Yeah,
now? 13
16.
years? 16 years? Yeah. You can look back and see, okay, there's a graph. But at that point, when I looked back and with the FOMO or fear of, being in, I thought, oh no, this thing it looks like it's just gonna go down. And exactly when I did get out is when things actually turned around.
Do you know, it's luck as well, my friend, right? So I invested in a business, went public. Share price was 47.50. Beautiful, right? We were sitting on $250 million profit. Today, the share price is 58 cents.
Oh wow.
But I haven't sold a single share because I have conviction that eventually it will come good. Now, if that conviction is wrong, right, then, I am going to lose a lot of money, right? When I could have made money. Even at 58 cents, I can make money. But if it goes to zero, and it could, right, then you would make nothing.
You get you look for a company with good utility. So does that company fundamentally strong? I guess you sound like a big believer in that company.
No, I think, look, ultimately, are you providing a product or a service, right, that people will use? And if they're going to use it, then that can generate scale and that can generate revenue.
Right.
But if you're doing something that nobody is going to use, or it's just like, for 24 hours, get on the whitelist, and basically get in and double, triple your money, that's not long-term investing.
So, I want to go back to this time in Beijing where you had to get money. They gave it to you in crypto.
Yeah.
You came and you said, look, I'm going to accept crypto. And you obviously then went and read the white paper and you got
Yeah.
into it, right? Because
Yeah.
once you get your money in, you're actually invested.
Yeah.
Take me from there, your journey with crypto.
So that was around 2016, 2017. I read the white paper and thought, you know what? Decentralized finance, TradeFi all had to move over, right? So you're going to see a mass amount of institutional capital come into this space. I thought it would have happened a little bit earlier, to be fair with you. I thought it would have been sort of 2022, 2023. But now it's really been driven by the BlackRock Spot Bitcoin ETS, January 2024, that has just changed the market. And the new administration in the US is very pro-crypto with setting up the right regulatory framework for that. I'd invested in 5 companies that had gone public via SPAC IPOs. So these are special purpose acquisition vehicles where sponsors go and raise capital, and then they go and acquire a company and take that company public. So we did the first one for crypto globally. And
You have the biggest SPAC in the world, the crypto SPAC.
yeah, we did.
right?
It's $230 million, which
Yeah.
we listed on NASDAQ.
But how do you go from just understanding about crypto to raising the biggest crypto SPAC fund in the world? Like at the time, you said it wasn't moving fast enough. Did that motivate you to make it happen?
I think so. My co-founder, right, had a big part to play in that, Michael Zhao, and he'd been doing crypto. He'd worked for the Central Bank of China, so he was in crypto even before I was. He was running an exchange.
It's good. At least he knows the regulatory part, right?
He knows the regulatory part. I think what we saw was how do we provide investors with protection? A lot of those companies that were growing really rapidly in 2021, 2022 in particular, and it goes back to your point of FOMO, right? Wall Street had FOMO, investors had FOMO, everybody was investing in everything. And you had valuations that were just very, very frothy, right? Companies that were valued at 8-9 billion when they should have been valued at a tenth of that in some cases. So we saw an opportunity that said, how do you build trust with some of these platforms and brands that they're not going to run away, right? And that they're regulated and they're audited and stuff like that. So that led to the thesis of saying some of these companies are growing really, really fast. And if they were actually public, this would be really good for the market. And it'd be good upside for us as investors.
So you were basically looking at protecting risk, not really the 100x becoming 1000x. You're looking at more, how do I protect that risk and offer something that's reasonable for a normal investor?
Yeah. So look, if you had bought Crypto One at $10 and we had announced a business combination, then, there's a good chance it could have been trading at $30, $40, right? For our investors. But within 12 months, we returned that $237 million to our public shareholders.
Take me a second back. Why do you say that there would be that increase?
Because you would have then taken a company public. That business hopefully would have met its forecasts. So when you're investing in a business to take public, you're obviously looking to provide them with growth capital. That's the reason they would take your money. And that means they can do acquisitions, they can launch in international markets, they can build out their teams, et cetera, et cetera. So you would expect that those companies would increase in value by size and scale. And as they're increasing in value, the share price would reflect that increase. So if investors would have bought in at that point, then you would have expected that the company, and there are great examples of SPAC companies that traded very well in the public markets. And there are also many examples of, unfortunately, companies that should not have gone public that did, that have really struggled in the public markets.
When you look at investing in a company, a lot of people watching this could be people looking for funding. They might have a crypto startup or thinking of doing a crypto startup.
Right.
What is that thing that you're really looking for from them?
A founder that has conviction, a founder that's done their homework, a founder that can actually articulate a TAM, right? This is the size of the market, can articulate an MVP of some sort, that I can see a demo, excuse me, that can articulate what the product or service will do. Not a me too. I think you're always looking for people that have the ability to engage you. And more importantly, that can tell a story, right? Because
A story.
for investors, what are you buying at the end of the day?
A great founder with a great story who's going to make something happen for you, right?
Right. And without those sort of three key ingredients, it becomes, so sometimes you'll get founders that are technically very, very strong, but can't articulate really what the customer value proposition is going to be. Sometimes you can be helpful in that regard because you can realize actually, well, adding this person with this person actually can make this more productive, right? But I also think, we've seen a lot, right? Globally. So, if it's another DEX, well, join the queue, right? If it's another one saying, I'm going to do another layer 1, there's a queue. I'm going to do another layer 2.
So something that's a bit out of the box, like an idea that's different, you'd say.
I think, but it's not necessarily just out of the box. It could be, there's a lot of stuff now going on with sort of AI, right? Sort of getting integrated into crypto, right? So
Right.
AI agents sort of going out and doing a lot of the trading on your behalf. Around security now, which is becoming a big issue, right? One of the other challenges now is that, scams, right? People could be, if we were on a Zoom call now, I could actually get your face printed 3D and, and pretend
nuts.
and that's nuts, right? And pretend to be Mahmood running this podcast and
Imagine.
asking all of your viewers to come in and buy this token and stuff like that, right? So you see sort of insane examples like that. And then, you see companies being created. I'm passionate about cars, right? And particularly about motor racing. So, we went out, we did an NFT play, but we photographed the most beautiful cars in the world, right? And we gave them out as NFTs. But not only that, is
a picture of the car.
Yeah. So,
okay.
But these are very specific from the Peterson Museum, Goodwood, you name it. We had this amazing photographer and we dropped them as NFTs, but those NFTs then also gave you experience to team principal dinners, pit lane access, going to Le Mans 24. We had one guy that actually was from Idaho, didn't even have a passport, and we took him to Le Mans.
So it's like a community. That's if someone buys the NFT, he joins a community, and then he can show up at different events
and stuff like that. So for us, like the power of digital is community first and foremost, right? It's like being in a tribe, right? You belong somewhere, right? You feel.
But then why not invest in a meme coin?
Because I think they tend to be short-lived, and if there's no utility to that community, if it's just like, hey,
how is the NFT of the car different than a meme coin of a car picture?
So it's not, well, one, because it's a unique, right? So for that particular car, because those were all collector's cars, right?
Okay.
So they're not mainstream. There are collectors that you can go to Geneva that will have 300 Ferraris that you will never, ever see.
So that car, no one can go print another picture of that car.
Yeah, okay. You can obviously take a photo of it or whatever, right? But you have a unique ID for that NFT. But more importantly, can you have dinner with Zach Brown? Can you go out and hang out with McLaren or with Ferrari? Can you go and hang out with Lewis Hamilton?
No, unless you're part of the
part of this community. So that's one example of a passion that has become a project that has now got a team behind it and a token behind it, or a token coming behind it.
That's so cool.
Yeah. So, for us, it's about investing in things that have longevity, not quick money. I think for a lot of first-time founders in crypto, there is this sense of urgency of like sometimes capitalizing on that movement around meme coins.
Look, you have $10,000, doctor. Yeah. You have $10,000. You need to invest it. Where do you put them?
Well, firstly, not financial advice, right? So
disclaimer out there.
Disclaimer out there. Look, I think at the end of the day, it's about liquidity, right? So on the one side, having $10,000 is one thing. The question is, when do you need the $10,000 back?
Say you didn't.
And say you didn't. Right now, I think Bitcoin is going to do well in the medium to long term. So leaving aside price volatility, right? 2 weeks ago, we were at 109K. Today, we're sort of early 80s, right? So 25, 30% volatility.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, I would always say to friends is that if you have a Bitcoin, and you've got young children, it'll pay for their college education, right? By the time they get around to college education. So you can park it. I think if you're investing in things that ultimately are for a quick return, and it won't necessarily be the best. I won't be the best person to sort of say, hey, go and invest in this meme coin or this token. But I think the fundamentals of anybody who's doing infrastructure, so, Solana, I think Ripple, I think, Ethereum, these types of projects, right, still have longevity. And I don't think they're going to disappear overnight. There'll be new things that come along and may replace them. But I think all the other stuff, yes, you may get a 10x or a 100x or whatever. But, and we have a Web3 bank called Clickle. It's fully regulated by Abu Dhabi Global Market.
Wow.
So we're actually going to be launching the KLK token soon.
KLK token.
Yeah.
How does that work? So if I wanted to buy a KLK token.
So we'll have a token sale coming soon. You can go to clickle.vip and learn more about it. But that is, fully regulated institution by ADGM.
Will there be physical locations or just?
No, so you'll be able to sort of go online and request an allocation to buy tokens. I think we have the TGE coming soon. I don't know the exact date, but
Sorry, what's TGE?
A token generation event. So it's when you sort of launch your token. But the goal there is to actually build a sort of, Manasa-focused stablecoin, right? Because I think in our part of the world, stablecoins have real utility, real value.
Why do you say that?
Just ease of moving money around, my friend, right? Today banking is very, very challenging, not only in the UAE, but anywhere related with crypto. It's getting easier in the US, but my own experience here, I think 3 years ago, I did a bank transfer of $300,000. I won't name the bank in the UAE, sent to my Crypto One Advisor's bank account in Delaware. For 3 months, the money just disappeared. Now, if it's $30 or $300, I can live with that, right?
Yeah.
Even $3,000. But it's $300,000, and the bank here couldn't tell me where it was. The correspondent bank couldn't tell me where it was. The receiving bank. And one
What do you
day,
think happened? Yeah.
the credit just came back into my bank.
What do you think happened?
Yes. Well, it's crypto, right? It's like somebody in compliance is saying like, and then that person in compliance is like either forgotten about it or is in no rush because it's crypto. So that sentiment really sort of 2022 to end of 2024 was very, very anti-crypto, particularly in the US, right, with the SEC and Gary Gensler and everything else.
Yeah.
And that led to a lot of thinking. And to be fair to the UAE, a real pioneer in clear rules and regulations, but the challenge was still banking. So even though you had the regulators, you had the do's and don'ts, the banks were basically very, very anti-crypto.
If I'm going to go and look back at different industries, I look at, for example, real estate, because I'm in the UAE and Dubai especially has, gone through rapid expansion in real estate.
Sure.
When I was here, before the financial crisis in 2008, Lehman Brothers, I saw massive adoption of real estate on the buyer side. On the developer side, I would say more marketing.
Right.
A lot of developers would play this game of moving the hat. So go back to 2006. I remember sitting with my father. My father sits to me, Allah yarhamah, he passed away now, but
Sorry.
Yeah, back in the day, he says, Mahmoud, I have in front of me this project and this project and this project.
Yeah.
Which is the right one?
All right.
And, looking now back, I'm thinking my father was probably confused because, there was only Emiratis allowed to buy Emirati lands.
Right.
Now you have all these new lands popping up with developers who don't have experience simply because it was new.
Right.
And each developer was kind of putting, they would put a picture of a property and then they would bring funds in and then they would move the hat because they would just take that down payment, create marketing somewhere else and somewhere else. And when you look at the ICOs that's actually happening in crypto now, it's the same thing. And then later people get burned. So, fast forward 2008, you had the world financial crisis. A lot of people that bought properties didn't get those properties. There was a shakeout. Whoever was doing something was doing it. And whoever was running around with, when the tide went out,
Yeah, it was caught short.
was
Yeah.
caught short. Was caught short. They were also there.
Yeah.
And then regulation comes in, which is the government's job, which says, hey, look, if you're a developer, you need an escrow account.
Yeah.
And people ask, what is an escrow account?
Sure.
But that need comes from something that goes missing. And I think the same thing when you look at crypto, it's the same thing because you're starting in a very early stage. Not so early, 13 years, 16 years, sorry. But I think there's still going to be so many more burns before we get to a stage. But on the flip side, in the Dubai real estate today, you can make money, but not the same kind of money you could make back
in
then.
the past. Yeah, it's
And,
true.
right?
So I think, look, for crypto, we're still very early. I think we have a trademark. We are still early, right?
Yeah.
So my view is that you have to do your homework. So, your dad was doing his homework by asking you, right? Relying on you to at least have local market knowledge to say, Baba, is this good or is this bad, right? I think a lot of times when people will come and say, is this good or is this bad? The question is, what's the track record of your sponsor or the team? What experience do they have? Can they sort of articulate very clearly? And are their incentives tied to the investor's incentive? That's very, very important. So if it's like, hey, the team is getting 50% of all the tokens, that's not good incentive.
No.
If the team is even getting 10% of the token, but theirs are all unlocked on the day of the token launch, that is not good. So the question is, since millennia, you've always had scams. You've always had people take advantage of others and their lack of understanding. So crypto is no different in that regard, right? Financial white crime is much bigger than crypto, right? It runs into hundreds of billions of dollars around the world, while crypto is a small fraction of that. But crypto gets all the visibility because it's shiny and it's new. And
there's so many different people involved, like so many small tickets, if you think about it, right? Like,
the difference is that you can invest $10, $100.
And be an investor that gets burnt and has a bad story to say.
But then, it's also a question of, I'd rather lose $10 or $100. But, for somebody, $100 could be the equivalent of $1 million, right? It's all really dependent. It's also a lack of, it's the lemming syndrome, right? So, in your social circle, if somebody says, oh, I'm investing in this, you should also invest in this.
But
that becomes a challenge.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, look, when I remember back then, even in the ICO craze with all the ICOs showing up with all the crypto, I would go online and see which people on YouTube did the best reviews on those tokens and buy based on marketing, right? Because that token, that company would have raised money, paid YouTubers to make videos. And if you have more videos or reviews, why one is better than the other, you go put some money in that ICO.
Right.
So if you really don't have access to the founder, what do you do? How do you verify that it's a real founder whose incentive is not all for him to just do a rug pull and take all your money?
I think, look, a lot of KOLs, right, key online influencers, right, are also tied to a project that may not necessarily be totally impartial, right? Because they may be paid in tokens to shill a particular project. Look, the basics are, go and check out the website, right? Make sure it's real, it's legit, it has the right domain name, right? Request information. If there is an ability to request information, do you get that in a timely manner? If they're claiming to be regulated, easy enough to go and check on the regulator's website. Is this company actually regulated? A lot of times people haven't even incorporated a company, right? So actually just go and do a company search, right?
Like physically go to the company?
No, you can just go online and say, does this company exist, right? Is there any negativity around this company? Is there any pending legal litigation? You can just, ABC Limited, right? Do a Google search and it will come back and tell you some stuff on ABC Limited.
Right.
And if you don't find anything on ABC Limited, that's also a bit of a flag, right? Like, why isn't...
the problem is sometimes these coins get listed on a big exchange and then there's a rug pull. And you're thinking like, they must have passed some checks, but then again, it's you're saying it's on the or it's on it's on the values of the founder, really.
I'm not saying, look, it's a fair point, right? I mean, if you think about, let's take Binance as an example, right? Most of their token launches in the last several months are below water, right?
Why do you think that's the case?
I think it's just, the exchanges themselves, and I don't know Binance economics, so I won't comment on that. But all the exchanges have a business model, right? And their business model is partly tokens, it's partly listing fees, it's partly market making and stuff like that. So if you're a sophisticated founder, without market making and liquidity, your token is dead.
Exactly.
right?
It's the liquidity provider in the end, right? That's going to cash you.
And that's what you need, right? And the reality is platforms like Binance and OKX are huge, right? And they can provide that, but at what cost? And ultimately, they're going to get their money first, right? So the question for you as a potential investor in a business is, one, is do your homework, right? Can you relate to this? Does this make sense to you, right? What you're investing in. So if you're investing in a meme coin and the idea is to get in as quickly as possible and get out as quickly as possible, that's a different story. But if you're investing in something that says, well, they have a vision, they have a plan, they have a 3-year roadmap, are they going to be able to actually get from here to that 3 years? And that's on you, right? To sort of say, are you prepared to take that risk? And then it goes back to quality of team, right? Are you launching something that is regulated? Are you launching something that has credible people around it, right? So when you do their reference, and a lot of times people will, when they're scamming you, they'll just take a profile of His Excellency and this, that, and the other, right? So,
Exactly.
so, so it's buyer beware, to be frankly honest with you, right? It's like, you have to sort of make a decision. One, don't put all of your capital into anything, right? Be modest, learn, experiment, experience. So maybe the first time around, if you had that $10,000, I'd probably take $500, right? Learn the process. How do you get onboarded? How do you actually get those tokens? What is an airdrop? How does all of this work, right? How can I actually sell and get liquidity? So unfortunately, for a lot of people who do get rug pulled, they don't know how to get liquidity. So they're sold on the fact that, hey, you have a token, it's gone from $1 to $5. Person's thinking, great, I've got 1,000 of those tokens, I'm now sitting on 50K. But in the reality is, well, how can I liquidate and how can I actually get my money out? So many people just don't know how to do that.
So the exchange has to be part of the rug pull then, right?
I'm not saying that an exchange, I definitely wouldn't say that the big players do anything like that. I'm saying that there are unsavory players in every jurisdiction around the world.
If I was thinking about it, right? I'm a big exchange. Let's not put names there. I'm biggest, whatever, number 1, 2, 3 exchange.
Yeah.
I have a bunch of people betting on one side. I know all their positions. And then I have the market maker that wants to provide me with capital. I'm going to have to give him a return. Where does that return come from?
Look, again, right, the business model of exchanges, I think some of it is a little bit murky, right? And deliberately so. But, let's take an exchange like Coinbase. It's regulated, right? The bar to get
You
onto,
invested in Coinbase
yeah, so
early on.
yeah,
You're such a smart guy. How did you figure it out?
it's the founder was very, very strong, right? And I think there were enough people around him that we knew that knew him well and said, look, this is again 0 to 1, right? It's either going to do something amazing or it may be too early. And I never feel bad about investing in anybody if they fail, if they give it 110%.
Respect,
Right?
yeah.
Not at all, right? It's like we tried, right? Alhamdulillah, right? We move on, right? But when you have founders who basically don't try particularly hard, right? Take your money, then you get a little bit like, rightly so, frustrated. So I think, the bar on getting listed on Coinbase is high, right? And it's high for a reason because they're looking to make sure that their reputation isn't damaged. They don't get sued. This is the advantage of being a public company. You can't hide, right? Like all the other players can hide because they're privately held, right? They don't have to disclose their accounts. They don't have to have that audit. They don't have to do X, Y, and Z. So that's the other advantage for investor protection is if you're with an exchange, I would definitely say that, if you can get a Coinbase account, it just comes with a higher bar. They've never been hacked, higher level of security.
And what do you say to the point where I say the exchange is against the retail investor because it's the institution that also needs to make money?
So look, I think spot trading is going to zero, right?
Really?
Yeah. I don't think that is a sustainable business model for exchanges going forward. The way they make their money is on PEPs and futures, right? And leverage and all that stuff. They don't make money on spot trading. So just like Robinhood came along and disrupted sort of Schwab and E-Trade and all of those platforms by saying no brokerage fees, right, on Robinhood.
No brokerage fees, right?
On Robinhood.
Yeah.
And then they acquired Bitstamp, which is an exchange late last year. Or, yeah, I think late last year. Robinhood understands that model of zero brokerage fees. You may see one or two exchanges basically say, spot trading is for free. And then all the other exchanges will have to capitulate in due course.
So you think that's going to happen for sure?
It's unsustainable that exchanges can charge you spot trading fees. Now, does it take 6 months or does it take 6 years? Probably not 6 months, and
because the
not 6
spot
years.
comes from that shift of institutional to retail, and they got to eat from somewhere, right?
No, but as leverage becomes more prominent, as futures and derivative instruments and PEPs, and they'll figure out other lending protocols, staking protocols, and stuff like that. But I think for basic, you buying and selling crypto, the trade on those fees, I think will go to zero. Now,
there's a lot of people that have this thing about leverage where they say, it's religiously not okay, or they say, I just want to buy and hold. I don't want any kind of leverage. How do you think they would? How would it play out for them in a world where everyone else is on leverage?
It's a great question. So I think, there's over 1 billion Muslims around the world, right? So it's not an insignificant community by any stretch. I think crypto penetration is actually pretty big in Indonesia, pretty big in Malaysia, India, Pakistan, right? Our part of the world and countries in Africa. There is a lot of work being done with Sharia scholars now on trying to figure out, are these currencies and securities halal or not? Can you do leverage? Can you do staking? The great business actually born out of Dubai, Abu Dhabi called Inshallah Network. I don't know if you've come across these guys. So Inshallah Network founders, ex-Stanford, Google, right? Super bright guys, went to Al-Azhar University, young, right? Studied Islamic finance and now basically are doing Sharia compliant staking on Ethereum.
Sharia compliant staking on Ethereum.
So the question is, the nodes need to be halal, right? Because if the nodes are doing girls and games and gambling and other stuff, right, then it doesn't make it halal.
And the node is?
I'm not specific what the node is, but the node has to be,
For someone that doesn't know what a node is.
Sharia compliant. I'm just saying.
No, but what is a node?
No, the node in this context is the servers that basically control.
The servers, right?
Yeah. So that server has, so think about it. It's like you can be in a pub, but you're not drinking any alcohol, right?
Okay.
So these guys actually got a grant from the Solana Foundation as well, right?
The Inshallah
Network, right?
Okay.
So for sort of Solana staking as well. So what's happening is the industry is still very, very nascent. And like a lot of Sharia scholars, it's a bit like beauty. It's in the eye of the beholder. So, you have many different perspectives and many different views. So, one scholar may say it's halal, another scholar may say it's not halal, right?
The leverage or the crypto?
Both, right?
Is there crypto is crypto haram?
No, I think, but there are some scholars that will turn around and say, the volatility aspect of this, buying into meme coins, being promised a certain return. So like Islamic coin came along and sort of said, you buy this coin and you're going to generate X, Y, and Z. You can't guarantee that, right? So, so I think different scholars will have different views, but my view is that why should not the Islamic world have access to the upside and the positivity of crypto?
Which is what you said earlier is a movement of money, right?
It's the movement of money, right?
I had Alex on the show.
Yeah, he's a good friend.
Yeah, I really like him. I respect him. He said that crypto teaches you everything you didn't know about computers and money. And that kind of stuck with me because, when I think about it, I worked in a bank for 10 years of my life. It's
Right.
a lot of experience. But I only started getting into the why of stuff when I started asking about and understanding about crypto, Islamic banking, all the other stuff that existed that was not the traditional thing that I knew. So crypto definitely helped me ask the right question, right? Like, why not? Or why?
Right. Yeah, it's like your kids, right? Explaining to you and what is blockchain and what is Bitcoin and what is Ethereum. And there's a lot of platforms out there now that I think do a pretty good job on education. There's like a Bitcoin book for dummies and for kids and stuff like that. So there's a lot of information out there that I think if you want to get access and you want to get better understanding, but in essence, if you look at what Michael Saylor now says is that Bitcoin is digital capital, right? Or digital gold or as a store of value. So, I can tell you we have a lot of gold in our house because we've got a lot of gifts, right, for gold. But we don't use it. I don't know how to value it. I don't know what, my wife doesn't wear it. It's just, it's sitting there, right? It's
Store of wealth.
Yeah, it's a store of wealth, but I'm always going to be on the wrong side of the trade for that gold. I'm going to go to the souk. I'm going to go to Dere. He's going to probably not give me a fair price.
You're always haggling.
Always going to haggle with you, right? And then it's going to be like, I've got to melt it down. I've got to check is it 18 karat, 24 karat, whatever, right? And then he's never going to give me a fair price.
No.
Right? And then he might not be able to do a bank transfer. It may be cash, it may whatever, right? But with Bitcoin, I don't have that issue, right? I can wire you, $100,000. You'll have it in 20 seconds. And you can use that and spend that as you see fit, right? And that could be us sitting here across the table from each other, or it could be you sitting in the Amazon jungle, right, on a boat.
And still get the money there.
And still get the money there. And none of this sort of 5 days losing 3-4% on sort of foreign exchange rate. That's the beauty of this industry, right?
And, you touched upon an important point. You spoke about Michael Saylor's company, which is, seen massive success. Why don't we have a similar one in this part of the world?
I think it's coming, right? And I think there's a lot of smart people now in our part of the world building great products and solutions that are being built out for the rest of the world. Now, we don't have a sort of a Stanford and a UCLA and all of that in the Silicon Valley. But I think when you look at the UAE leadership, you look at, the sovereign wealth funds here and the sort of family offices are now starting, I think there was a big push on AI as well, right? But I think people are looking at sort of digital capital, digital platforms, looking at tokenization. You talked about real estate earlier, right? It's how can I have fractional ownership in buildings? The challenge is that whenever you're doing a particular engagement around crypto, it's all the other 99 things that lead from that. And what I mean by that is, well, how does the banking work? How does the custody work? What happens in death? What happens in divorce? What happens when you move out of the country? What happens if your estate...
Because you're kind of getting out of the normal system, right? So it's like you're creating a new law with that money that's there, which is everyone... Like, I always compare it to... I watched on Netflix a while ago, this guy called Osho.
Okay.
He was religious in some kind of religion. He basically went and rented a big piece of land in the US, and he stood at the door and said, look, if you want to come in, you give me all your money, and inside I'll give you land and a job. And, and then he had people doing different things. And, and I think crypto is pretty much the same. Once you get into a coin, you give your fiat, you get in, then the rules there are different, right? Unless there's like a big regulatory body that controls everything.
Right.
And that's kind of,
scary.
It's scary, right? When you think about it.
And the rules can change, right? But again, right, the question is it a flutter, right? And what I mean by that is it like, $10, $100, and it doesn't change your life if there's a loss.
I agree with you 100%. My other thinking is, again, Michael Saylor, super smart guy, I see.
Yeah.
He said, park everything else on the side. Just take Bitcoin, which has fixed rules. You can't change those rules. There's only 21 million, no one, or 24 with one out, or whatever the numbers are, they don't change. What if you just took so there's a traditional company, which he had a traditional company. He just changed the reserves to Bitcoin, which is what the US government's also doing now. They're running traditional. Yes, they have Elon Musk there, but I mean, how much change can you really make? There's humans at the end that need to eat and live, and there's so it's not in my opinion. I'm not a politician, but I would just say it's not a private company. In a private company, heads can fly and the numbers can. So in my opinion, I would say the thing that's really interesting for me is that Bitcoin reserve. And I think if there's a Bitcoin reserve, it means that thing is definitely going to be implemented everywhere else, right?
So Mahmoud, I'll just turn that question back to you for a second before I give you my view on it. Who do you think invented Bitcoin?
Well, I think we both know the answer.
right? So, my view is that, it could have been an agency of the US government, right? Who knows, right? But it's in the mix, right? On whoever it was. The reality is, Saylor's a great salesperson, right? And I think what he's done at MicroStrategy is nothing short of amazing. A lot of that growth has been driven by FOMO, believe it or not, right? People wanting to get in and not miss out, right? And getting exposure to what he's doing. Some of the instruments are very much on the aggressive side, right? But people are still buying in, right? And I think yesterday he announced another $21 billion Bitcoin purchase, right? All of this is driven by one simple fact that the US at all costs will try and maintain the US dollar as the global reserve currency of the world at all cost. It's the one thing they can't sacrifice because it's the one thing that gives them leverage over everyone and everything else. Now, you've got a lot of factions like BRICS and other things that are trying to sort of wean off the dollar and some headway. But unfortunately, if you think about sovereigns, family, what are you invested in? Most indirectly, everybody is in the S&P 500.
Yeah, one way or another.
And in one way or another. And if to extricate yourself out of that is not straightforward, right? And then for governments to basically use leverage by saying we're going to put you on the terror financing list and we're going to do X, Y, and Z is political advantage that they can hold on anybody who's pegged to the US dollar or to maintain.
Yeah, I don't want to go too much onto that side, but I want to go back to the point where we're talking about Bitcoin and saying, okay, you have Bitcoin, you're saying who created it. I'm not bothered with who created it. The S&P 500, for example, was created by a lot of people. Today, those same people own, NVIDIA guy has like, 3 or 6% in his company. What does he really,
Right.
even if he was a smart guy and put it together, today it's the BlackRocks and the Vanguards that have the majority, right?
True.
And you could say at some point that they control all the S&P 500. I would say they also control Bitcoin at some point. Otherwise, it wouldn't get on the reserve.
Look, BlackRock is probably 3 companies own Wall Street, right? So Vanguard, BlackRock, and Fidelity.
And now Bitcoin.
88%.
Yeah.
Right? And now you've got BlackRock and Fidelity and many others coming in and creating the hype, creating the infrastructure. So this is a well thought out game. So it's chess, right? But they're playing several moves ahead. So this is not suddenly that Larry Fink just woke up one day and said, I'm going to bet the house on Bitcoin and digital assets. This has been well thought through for over a decade for them, planning, thinking about it, doing the spot Bitcoin ETFs. And you think about it, right? I remember Gary Gensler was very anti-crypto. There was lawsuits on everyone. And then why did the spot Bitcoin ETFs get approved in January 2024 when the vote was 2 for, 2 against, and the chairman had the deciding vote? So on the one side, publicly, he's saying this is evil, this is like used by terrorists and Elizabeth Warren and all of that bandwagon.
Yeah.
But he decided to approve it, right? Now, where Gary lands as his next job, who knows, right? But it could be an affiliate of BlackRock, just saying. But the reality is, this is about structural change. And structural change, one, takes time. It doesn't get done overnight, but it takes years to put into play. And that's exactly what's been happening in and around digital assets. So now all the lawsuits have just basically disappeared.
Right?
Yeah. That Ripple lawsuit is gone. Coinbase lawsuit is gone.
The Ripple guy is hanging out with Donald Trump now.
No, I mean, Howard Lutnick is now Commerce Secretary, right?
Yeah.
Owns 5% of Tether, right? What was it? Yesterday, for the first time in the history of the US presidency, you had Donald Trump shilling a Tesla.
Wow.
Right? He was the advert. He spent 30 minutes in this car, right, with Elon Musk in the sort of grounds of the White House saying, this is really cool. I like the dashboard. I like this. I like that. A sitting president, right? So the rules of order are also changing. Now, everybody knows Trump is a business guy, right? So at the end of the day, right? But,
expect a rug pull.
But look, I mean, again, not advocating buying Tesla stock, but it's 50% down. It's probably going to go back up, right? Pretty soon, right?
If someone can make a change, it has to be the richest guy in the world, the guy who's connected with the president. If someone can make a change, right, you'd have to agree that it has to be someone who's already very, very I always think about influence, and I think, I buy two things. I only own two stocks, and I'm happy to share. I only own, if I ever gonna own, for now, for the foreseeable future, I own Tesla and I own Bitcoin.
Right. Okay.
And one has supply, and the other
Yeah.
one has the smartest guy.
Yeah.
I find if I'm gonna bet, if I'm gonna be wrong,
Look, I mean, both of those are good stocks, right? And I think Tesla's probably done you pretty well over the sort of time you've had it, and I'm sure Bitcoin has also done well. The day soccer mom gets Bitcoin is when it becomes mainstream, and we're not there yet,
no,
right? So the reality is,
soccer mom when
yeah.
she gets it,
when she
and
gets
then
it,
we have to get out.
right? So, the analogy is 50 million people in the United States now own crypto, but that's not 50 million soccer moms. And, so the soccer mom is, the white picket fence, the two kids, doing the school run and all of that. And basically talking to RIA, right, a registered investment advisor or wealth manager, and saying, hey, I should have some exposure into Bitcoin, either directly or through spot Bitcoin ETFs. And the finite supply thing is really cool because today there's not enough Bitcoin in the United States for every millionaire and above to own one whole Bitcoin. There isn't.
Just for the millionaires.
Just for the millionaires.
So
if all the millionaires in the United States today wanted to own one Bitcoin, they can't.
they'd already push, and Michael Saylor is obviously there. And I think you've shared some really important and really great information for people there that you shared your knowledge, and I think that's great. I want to move forward now to our rapid fire round.
Sure.
I'm going to ask you a few questions. You got one word or one sentence to
Sure.
answer. All right. You had to hold it for 10 years. Would you hold Bitcoin or Ethereum?
Bitcoin.
Okay. What's an exciting crypto project that you're watching right now?
Clickle.
Clickle.
Klickl. It's a Web3 bank out of the region. Great founders and building something that has real utility and something that's needed, because I know this is not a one-word answer, but all crypto projects need banking. And having a bank that is friendly, easy to use, easy onboarding is needed not just here, but everywhere.
This is the one that's out of ADGM?
Yes.
Great. So it'll be, I think also...
And it's fully regulated, right? That's the biggest advantage for investor protection.
Exactly. What's the biggest mistake experienced investors make?
Not doing their homework.
Okay.
And an example of that is FTX. Think about it, right? So Temasek and GIC and all these guys came in on the back of not doing their homework thoroughly, right? Because there was other investors in. They just took that.
Copy them, yeah.
And took that as homework. And the reality is you got to do your own homework.
If you had to make a bet on one emerging market outside of the US, what would it be?
I mean, I've lived here for 15 years, so UAE is definitely home. And I think amazing things are happening in this part of the world. But I also think amazing things are happening in broader Asia. So countries like Indonesia, there's some really, really interesting things going on in Indonesia right now.
Like what?
Look, just innovation, mobile money, crypto adoption, regulatory framework being put into place. It's got the largest Muslim population in the world, 220 million people. There's a lot of good things that are happening, and it has scale. That's the issue, right? You need scale. You need large populations. So countries like Nigeria, Indonesia, Thailand, Kenya, these types of countries have Egypt, right? Have large populations. So as the UAE, we're relatively small in comparison, but we're doing very, very big things.
Dubai real estate or Bitcoin?
Bitcoin.
Interesting.
What about you? How would you?
I think the very interesting. I come from a traditional family. We have some real estate, so that's why for me I was looking at other stuff like Tesla and Bitcoin. But yeah, real estate obviously it's the main thing. I think real estate is the way I think about it is you have growth, but then you have a different kind of stability from rental income. And I think with real estate, you get the rental income, and it kind of, if you're trying, you asked that question earlier, is when do you need your money? Now, if you need to live off something, Bitcoin doesn't really pay dividends in the
Yes,
traditional
yeah,
sense.
that's true.
So it's nice to have a mix. I would say if I had, let's say 100 potatoes or $100 or
Yeah,
100
yeah.
dirhams, whatever, 100 million, 100,000, whatever you want to call it. If I had 100 of those, I would put 50 in different real estate classes. So I'd go residential and I'd go industrial. I'd skip the commercial
Okay.
part. And then I'd go 25 into Bitcoin and 25 into like something like a Tesla, maybe one other company with it. But, something with a really good founder who has the ability to innovate, even if the product doesn't really work.
Right.
But this is from my limited experience.
No,
that's
I
what
mean, look, at the end of the day, diversification of risk is important, right? But when I look at real estate, I think we're at sort of saturation levels
Right now.
in our part of the world. Capital is also moving out, right? So all that sort of Russian money is now going to places like Vietnam and Thailand and stuff like that. But ultimately, is real estate going to put, Eric Trump was here, Bitcoin miner, I think in November. And, the Trump family has built its wealth on real estate, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he was actually saying, don't buy real estate, buy Bitcoin. So I found that quite...
Eric Trump was saying
Yeah,
that?
Eric Trump was saying it in Abu Dhabi, right?
Wow.
Standing on stage in front of 1,000 people saying, don't buy real estate, buy Bitcoin. So I actually found that quite interesting because it was just like,
That's why you said Bitcoin instead of real estate. Makes sense.
for his family. I'm not saying he's right or wrong. I'm just saying that diversification is important, right, in any portfolio construction. But I do think ultimately in the long term, because real estate is just capped with supply and demand, oversupply, interest rates. There are many things that you can't control. But I think with Bitcoin, because we have a finite amount of supply, the demand continues. And that demand retail hasn't even touched it yet.
But what about something like Ethereum?
I think Ethereum is obviously, it's a bit like you have technologies that have been around for several years and then they get displaced. Is it Solana? Is it something else, right? Who knows? But the sort of adoption now in comparison to Bitcoin and Ethereum, the disparity is huge. So Ethereum, is like 7%, 7.5%, right, of the total market now for crypto. I see that number declining because I think there are other solutions now that people are going to be building on going forward. So yeah, it was the original sort of big daddy and everybody was building on that and everybody knew how ERC20 worked and was on all the exchanges. But it's cumbersome, gas fees are expensive, it's not. And you've got very smart developers coming through now looking at different platforms, building different platforms.
Which ones are they going to?
I think Solana is definitely something that people are sort of...
Especially for the meme coins.
I mean, that's what's driven the growth of Solana, right?
Exactly. Look, Dr. Dr. Kidwai, this has been a masterclass for someone that actually wants to learn about crypto and understand where to invest. I think if someone watching wants to reach you, where's the best place to get in touch with you?
They can get me on Telegram under Najam Kidwai, and they can look me up on LinkedIn.
Great. And, a lot of people watching my show, they don't actually press the subscribe button. So I want to tell them, guys, if you enjoy this and you've got some kind of value, please press subscribe so we can continue to get amazing guests.
You should. And Mahmoud, thank you for having me. It was a really pleasure speaking with you this afternoon. Thoroughly enjoyed it. And yeah, you should subscribe to his channel. It's brilliant.
Thank you very much.
Take care, my friend. Thank you so much.